I think we can start. Thank you for joining today's lecture. And maybe a few words about the English language, because I think even for everybody it's important to speak English, but for chess players especially, because it's an international language, and when you go abroad, everybody will speak to you in English. And when you play tournaments here in the Czech Republic with some foreigner, against some foreigner, you will speak in English too. And don't worry, you can hear that my English is far from perfect, and it's normal, because I mean, nobody can speak perfect English, only native speakers, and everybody can learn basics of English, and then you can talk to each other. And it's no problem that you can't say proper grammar or tenses and everything like that, because the most important thing is to understand each other. So I hope you will understand me, and we will have a nice lecture about World Chess Championship match. It was played in Dubai, and as you probably know, it was won by Magnus Carlsen very convincingly. At least it seems like that. He won the match against Jan Nepomniachtchi by a big margin. It's 7.5, 3.5. He won 4 games and lost 0 games. And I wanted to show you a few moments from the match, but you probably know the games already. So I wanted to highlight some psychological moments that I think were important in this match. And I will start by a short video of Magnus. You will see this is Magnus playing the match. He is confused by something that Jan Nepomniachtchi played. We will talk about this moment in today's lecture, and this maybe can be be typical for the match. It will sum up the match pretty nicely, because Jan Nepomniachtchi played very well, but he made few big mistakes, and that was the decisive factor of the match. Also, I wanted to show you comment of Jan Nepomniachtchi. He said after the match that it was a big experience to play for the World Championship crown, but he felt that his loss had almost nothing to do with chess. The match, of course, consists of many aspects. I mean, it's not only chess preparation, but also physical, psychological, and it's extremely tense. I want to explain you the atmosphere of a World Championship match. Of course, I've never played a World Championship match myself, but I think from the history and from the comments of players who played the match, we can say that it's completely different from normal tournaments, from normal games, because there is a big tension. You know, there are 2 players playing for the crown, the most important match of their lives, and it's nothing like anything else, you know. It's something you don't experience in normal chess life. It's something else, and for every chess fan, it's a brilliant chance to watch the best players play. It's completely different from any other tournament. It's different atmosphere, different tension for the spectators and also for the players. And that was important in the match. Okay, stop talking. I wanted to show you the second game of the match. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask me. You can write it in the chat, or you can ask me directly. Why not? Please let me know if anything is wrong, if you don't understand, or if you want to do something differently, don't be afraid. And really, don't be afraid to ask me, because you will practice your English by that. I wanted to start with the second game of the match. You know, Magnus Carlsen was a big favorite, that's for sure. But I think the first half of the match was played excellently by Jan Nepomniachtchi. You maybe know that 5 games ended in a draw. So it was 2.5, 2.5. And it could have been even better for Jan Nepomniachtchi, and I will show you. I was in London when this game was played. It's a coincidence, but I watched this game in London, and I was very surprised by the aggressivity that Magnus chose for his first white game. It was his first white game. Of course, he wanted to win in the beginning of the match, as he was a big favorite, and he chose Catalan opening. And now Black can play, for example, Bishop D7, or A6 is the main variation, of course. Then Queen takes C4 and B5, and Queen goes back. He plays Bishop B7. It's an old main variation. He can play also B6, a little bit surprising line, but he played B5. And you will see in all of these games that Jan Nepomniachtchi played with a big aggressivity. And I think both players wanted to have initiative in the match. It was really a great fight till the 6th game. You will see the 6th game. It was a great fight from both players. And I know that many of my friends, they told me like, oh, they are making draws. It's 5 draws already, and it's a boring match because nobody can win and stuff like that. But honestly, I was very surprised by these comments because the games were brilliant, you will see. So he played B5. Now you can see that this Catalan bishop is very strong. The main variation here is to play A4, but Carlsen played knight E5. Now there is a possibility to take Queen takes D4. Many of these lines were behind the curtains because, okay, Black didn't play that, but it was a possibility to sacrifice an exchange like that. And it would have been a completely different game. But Black played C6. It's also good. If you take, I take, he takes, and rook B8. The rook is covering the pawn, and Black is okay. So after C6, White played A4, and it's a pawn sacrifice. You know, people say that Magnus Carlsen is playing dull chess. That he's playing for an in-games, and he doesn't sacrifice material. And it's interesting because I think for this match, for the World Championship match, he chose the strategy to play aggressively for the initiative, to sacrifice material, because he knew that Jan Nepomniachtchi is weaker in defense than in attack. It's important because if you prepare for any opponent, you should know his weaknesses and strengths. And Carlsen was happy to sacrifice material, to sacrifice pawn for the initiative. And I think this was his strategy for the whole match. You will see that also afterwards. And this second game, it was really perfect. I was amazed by the quality of play because they played it almost like computers. And after knight d5, you probably saw the game, so I shouldn't ask you what happened. But the problem for White is that this knight is standing very well, and if you play e4, then the knight can jump to b4, and there is a big weakness on d3. So that's the problem. Of course, Carlsen played knight c3, that's logical. Nepomniachtchi had to kick this knight out of e5, so he had to go back. Queen d7 covering b5. And now I remember that I was standing in the foyer of Waterloo Station. The English Chess Federation had a nice presentation of the match there with commentators and big screens and stuff like that. And I was thinking about this position, and I didn't know what to do. You know, if you go through the games with computer, the computer will show you 0, 0, 0, and you don't understand the moves behind it. It's better to watch the commentary of some experienced player, because now I wasn't sure what to do. If he plays e4, I will jump knight b4, and there is a big weakness of d3. So I wasn't sure if it's a good move or not. But what to do if I go b3? Then the knight here is weak, and also it's a proper pawn sacrifice. He can take the pawn, right? Get rid of these doubled pawns. And I was surprised because Magnus really played e4. It's the most logical move, but it's a very aggressive one. And I wasn't used to see Magnus Carlsen playing games like that. I was very surprised by his approach, that he sacrificed the pawn. He built a strong center, but it's a very concrete play. I was very surprised by the approach Magnus chose. And this was something that surprised me in the match, that they were really extremely well prepared. They prepared psychologically, as I've showed you this quote from the press conference after the match, that the match consists many aspects, not only chess preparation, but psychological preparation. And it's important to understand that both players, they really wanted to win, and they devoted all of their preparation to the match. They wanted to become world champions. You know, Magnus, of course, he wanted to hold the title, but Jan Nepomniachtchi, he really wanted to win. After the match, because you know the result, Magnus is a world champion again. But after the match, I've read something like, oh, he collapsed after the first loss, and it was a terrible match from Jan Nepomniachtchi. But I think that's not true. You will see in this game, in the second game, that really Jan Nepomniachtchi could have won the match. He was extremely well prepared. Carlsen played e5, and now I would be very worried by this diagonal. It's a very tense situation. And I would choose white in this moment, but I wasn't sure. Okay, this d5 is weak again. This knight is very strong. It's an interesting situation. And they really continued with computer-like precision. He played bishop b7. He takes f6, bishop takes, and knight e4. It's a nice move because knight controls these squares. Also, Black is behind in the development. He has this knight on b8, which is badly placed. And when I looked through the game at this moment, I wasn't sure what to do with Black. But he continued knight h6, and this is an excellent move. He is developing the knight. It may go to b4, it may go to c7 to support this pawn. And also there is a question, what is white going to do? The correct continuation here was to take the bishop, because the bishop pair is important. The bishop was a good piece, and he is preparing knight e5. If he takes with the pawn, then I can happily go bishop h6, and white has a good compensation. These pawns are weak, the king is weak, but Black has a pawn and a strong knight. This was the correct continuation. But Magnus played knight e5, which is also perfectly logical move. And now Nepomniachtchi reacted with brutal force. He took, and then he played knight c5. And I think in this moment, Magnus really realized that this match is not going to be easy. Because now black has a threat of knight b3. Of course, this is not good to take, because if you take, I take, and this pawn is hanging. This bishop has no good squares. So this is not correct. And one would like to go knight d6, that happened in the game, but after knight b3, rook is attacked and bishop is attacked. And of course, now computers are screaming that black is better, but on the other hand, this knight is perfect and the situation is far from clear. I think spectators were very happy at this moment because the game is very tense. And it's just the beginning of the match. White played rook b1 and then he sacrificed an exchange. And I don't remember any World Championship match in the last few years. I mean, Magnus played against Anand, against Karyakin, against Caruana. And he didn't have positions like that because now the world champion is an exchange down. And this was beginning of a very interesting match. Now, honestly, I was thinking, like, where is the compensation? Of course, there is the knight, but it's an exchange. So I was thinking, like, hey, what went wrong? Carlsen played all the logical moves, and suddenly he is an exchange down. I was very surprised by the development. But of course, the situation is not easy because of this knight, of this diagonal. But I would expect such position in, I don't know, in a Blitz championship, in a Blitz Czech chess championship, you know, in my game, I would expect to have position like that, but not in a world championship match. Because usually you play solid moves. You play for the world title, it's a different atmosphere than normal games, and you don't expect to have positions like that. You remember the match between Aljechin and Capablanca, you know. They played many solid games, many draws. Karpov and Kasparov, they also played many draws. And you don't expect to have position like that. So I was worried that Magnus will lose the game. And before the match, of course, Magnus was the favorite, but people, they said, like, it depends whether Magnus will prepare and whether he will play his best or not. Also about Jan Nepomniachtchi, they said the same. We will see if he will prepare, if he will devote everything to the preparation, and if he will play his best. And the answer in the beginning of the match was that both players, they played their best. And now the game continued like this: rook b8, rook d1. Again, there's a possibility of knight takes b5, maybe knight takes c4, you know, the knight can jump everywhere. Bishop a8 now. And now Magnus played bishop e4. I think Jan Nepomniachtchi underestimated this move. He is creating an attack on h7. After the game, Jan Nepomniachtchi said that he thought that he is going to win the second game, that he is an exchange up, and there is no attack on the king side, and this move was a surprise for him. It's a very strong one. And he reacted by a move that was not anticipated by any commentator. He played c3. And they also got in a time trouble around this move, both players. And what is the idea behind this move? You know, Black, of course, he wanted to take here, but he was afraid of something like that. This and rook d4 and rook h4, threatening mate on h8. So it was an idea like that. And actually he played c3 because he wanted to have an open b file to counter this attack by playing c5 and rook b1. So he sacrificed the pawn on c3 because of this variation. It's wonderful. And if you analyze the games from the World Championship match, you will always find these ideas that were not played, but they are behind the moves, the ideas, and that's what is nice for the chess fan. As you can see, I enjoy watching the games very much because I like the game. And when you find such an idea, it's nice. Objectively, computer will say it's not a good move, but I don't blame Jan Nepomniachtchi for playing this c3. It's a nice idea and a logical continuation from one point of view. Computer will say that b takes a4 is better because actually this one is not working. As I've shown you, Black has time to counter the attack, but it's not easy, you know. For example, like this. Now, if you play like this, and if you play c5, I can hide here. And that's the variation Magnus saw. It's brilliant. So, computers, they have their own opinion, but for human, I think c3 is a nice idea. But now Magnus switched to the queen side. It's also an interesting point that he took the pawn and he took another pawn. And now it's only an exchange, not a pawn. And these pawns are weak. So there is a definite compensation for an exchange. And now the game continued like this. They exchanged the bishop. Now you need to be careful because f6 is under attack. Knight went back, and all these pawns are weak. It's very difficult to play a position like this in a time trouble. So there was that moment when Black played c3 when maybe he can play something else. For example, when I return, there was also a possibility of playing g6 and queen g7 like that. To protect the king side, maybe that was better. In the game, in this position, it's already around equal. And after taking this pawn, Magnus played king g2 and king h3. The idea you've already seen. And now it may be even be a bit better for white because he has a knight and a pawn. But he allowed Black to take on d6. And in this position, it's pretty much equal. 3 against 2. I was curious if Jan Nepomniachtchi will hold this in-game against Magnus, because Magnus is famous for winning drawn-in games. But actually Nepomniachtchi hold this in-game very easily. and it was a nice move, king h6. And actually it was a pretty easy draw for Jan Nepomniachtchi. And I was amazed by the quality of the second game. And I was looking forward to the next few games, because actually Jan Nepomniachtchi had good chances in the first half of the match. And it's a bit sad, because in history there will be the 7.5, 3.5, and Magnus won the match, and it was by a big margin. And it's a bit sad for Jan, because he really had his own chances, and he played the first half of the match excellently. That's what I wanted to say in this lecture. We will skip next 3 games, and we will go to the 6th game directly. The 6th game is the longest game in a World Championship match ever played in history. And I must say that I think Magnus won this game by his immense will for victory. It's fascinating to watch the whole game that was actually quite equal, but this focus of Magnus, that he was able to break his opponent, is something that you don't see every time. You know, when you have super tournament, for example, David Navarra will play the Geshimov Memorial that starts next week. There will be nice games. It will be fun to watch, of course. You can learn something, but it's different. Match for the World Crown has completely different atmosphere. It's such a big fight that only few players can endure the pressure from the world champion. Now it's Magnus Carlsen. And in retrospective, you can say that these guys like Sergei Karyakin and Fabiano Caruana, really they did a great job. They lost a match against Magnus, but they were able to draw in standard games 6-6. And in retrospective, you can say that they did better than Jan Nepomniachtchi, and you can say that they did a great job. It's important to acknowledge that. I wanted to give you a little introduction to the psychology behind the decision of the players. And now I will talk about this 6th game. They started by another Catalan defense. It's true that in World Championship matches against d4, Black usually plays d5 and e6. It's surprising, right? Because Jan Nepomniachtchi, he normally plays Greenfeld defense. He plays knight f6, g6, and d5. But for this match, he decided to stay calm and to play the classical line with d5. Also, it was the same story for Kasparov. It was the same story for Alekhine. The classical Queen's Gambit declined, or in this case Catalan, is the topical opening for the World Championship match. I will check the chat. Again, if you want to ask anything about the match, don't be afraid. I will happily answer if I will know the answer. This b3 is not the main line, of course. We have seen before. This was played in the second game. Now b5. But maybe Nepomniachtchi decided that maybe he would play something else. I don't know. But Carlsen played b3. And also it's important that he surprised his opponent at least a bit. And it's also a good decision for you. If you prepare for the game, it's important that you surprise your opponent and you play something he doesn't know. Because if he does know, the computer evaluation and analysis, it's bad for you. Of course, but this is a theory, so c5 was normal, c4 was normal, takes, and now queen c2. And again, I was surprised because Carlsen is sacrificing the pawn by knight bd2. Black can take the pawn. But black is going to be under pressure for a long time. I don't know, white can take either with the pawn or with the queen or with the knight. And then I can imagine something like this and this. And bishop a3 is threatening. And there will be a long-term pressure for white. And that's something Jan Nepomniachtchi didn't want to go in. So this is an interesting moment that black didn't take the pawn. Instead, he played knight c6, and after knight takes, he played b5. And this is something, again, I feel sorry for Jan, because this is a great decision, really, a great practical decision, a very aggressive one. And people, they will remember only the final score of the match. I don't know, it must be very hard for Jan Nepomniachtchi to, because he knows this, and it must be very hard for him to cope with that. And if something surprised me during the match, it was the way how Jan Nepomniachtchi handled the press conferences, because chess player after a loss, usually we tend to be angry, sad. We don't want to hear anything, but he handled the situation in a very professional way. But honestly, I don't envy him this situation, because he knows that he played the first half very well, but the result is not good. So it's a bit sad. Because after the b5 move, I was very surprised by that, and I didn't know what will happen next after knight e5, because if you take, then white is going to take. The rook is hanging, and you can't go here because of knight c6. So this b5 actually looks stupid, but it's a very strong move. And I don't know how black was able to find it. And he was thinking for 8 minutes on that, and he was thinking 13 minutes about knight c6. So it was not a preparation, I think. And I don't know, everybody would play bishop d7, right? In this moment, and then rook c8, rook d8. But white has the pressure, that's for sure. He can go like this, or bishop g5. And he has this Catalan bishop, and it's a small plus for white. Then maybe at some moment knight e5. So it can be a bit better for white after bishop d7. But this b5 move is an excellent decision. After knight e5, black didn't take, and he played knight b4. Again, a very aggressive move. It reminds me some computer games. It's not human chess, I think. This one, b5 and knight b4. So from my perspective, it's a brilliant decision. Carlsen played queen b2 because now after knight b4 we won a tempo, and black was able to put the bishop on this diagonal. So Carlsen played a3, knight c6, knight d3. He didn't want to exchange knights. Bishop b6, bishop g5, that's logical. Rook d8. Now bishop takes f6. Computer is not a fan of this move. because he values highly the bishop pair. But from the practical point of view, this is something very useful, because this spoiled pawn structure will remain there for the rest of the game. And I think Carlsen already had in mind that he wants to go into an endgame with this knight against this bishop. And that's something these players know, that they aim for a specific material imbalance, and they aim for the endgame already, that he wants to go in such an endgame. That's why he spoiled his pawn structure, and now he wants to exchange all the pieces and go for this endgame, this very strong knight. But there is a problem. There are rooks and queens. So the story of this game is now what is going to be exchanged and what will stay on the board. It's an interesting story, because now after rook c1 takes, we will exchange the bishop pair, and we are almost there. We are almost there, but there are these pieces staying on the board. And Nepomniachtchi, of course, activated the queen. And up till now, Black played the game very, very well. We have king g7, rook d2. And you can see that Magnus is preparing something like queen d1, put pressure on the d file, and then maybe trying to kick this bishop out by playing e3, maybe. But when I was watching the game, I didn't expect Black to play rook a8. And honestly, it's another brilliant decision. And I think Magnus here, now he realized that he is playing against a very strong opponent. But I think it motivated him to play even better. And I think this 6th game is one of the best games that was played in a World Championship match history. It's such a great fight. I mean, you can play anything else. You can play h5 here, f5. Computers, of course, they show 0, 0, 0. It's an equal position. Black has a strong bishop, white has a good knight. It's an equal position now. But to play such a move like rook a8, it's something you don't expect from a human, because usually we think that 2 rooks are better than the queen. So it's basically a sacrifice. And why Black sacrificed these 2 rooks? Because he realized that there is a weakness on b3. He wants to attack it. And you can see that these pieces that remained on the board, they have no coordination. White would be more happy to exchange the rooks. He wanted to have the queen on board, because the queen cooperates with the knight very well. But rooks remained on board. And we have this big weakness. After b4, a4, we have this weakness. And it's something extraordinary that Black decided to go for it. And I think in this moment, Black is playing for the win. He wants to go here and take the pawn. And on the top of that, Carlsen, in this moment, he got into a big time trouble. He had something like 3 minutes for 10 moves or something like that. And I was watching the game, and I could feel the tension. And I was worried for Magnus, because he is white in this game. He wanted to win, and now he is under pressure. So it was a very surprising turn of events that White seemed to be under pressure. He played e3. Now there was already a possibility of playing bishop b2. We will see that in the game. Play bishop e5. Now h4. I watched the commentary of Vishy Anand here, and also of a commentary of Judith Polgar. And this h4 move was something that they didn't see. Magnus is creating place for his king. Because, for example, I don't know, if you play something else, like I don't know what to do, Rook c5 maybe. Yeah, they analyzed this variation. And he goes like this, and if you take, he takes, and if you take, he takes. And there are always ideas connected with a weak king, for example, queen c1 or queen a1 even. Now this position is already difficult for white. But if you create place for the king on h2, it can't be attacked there. It's very good place for the king. I think h5 is not that good because it doesn't do anything for the king, and it was better, I think, again, to play bishop b2, a nice idea that will follow in the game after next few moves. Because white can't take with the rook, there's knight hanging, and he can't take with the knight because there is rook hanging, and a3 is threatened. The position is very complex because, for example, after bishop takes a3, the bishop is almost trapped. You can play something like rook c2, trap the bishop. And imagine, you are playing for the World Chess Championship title. You have 3 minutes, you need to play 10 moves, and you are in a position like this in the most important match of your whole career. That's for Jan Nepomniachtchi. And you have position like this. It's something, you know, I literally could feel the tension for the players. He played h5, but I think it's not such a good move. King h2, that's what Magnus wanted, and bishop b2 anyway, and finally. Now white could have played something like rook c2, and computer will show you that there is a win for white in this position, that he will attack black's king. And many spectators, they wrote something like, oh no, a blunder. Carlsen wasn't able to find rook c2, what a shame. Such an easy move, computer shows +3. You know, and these people, they are like total crazy, you know, because it's a sacrifice of 2 pawns. And now black will go somewhere with the queen, and b4 is hanging. And I don't know if somebody would be able to play a move like that. Rook a2, it's another story, but he can play queen b3, and really the position is extremely complicated. So I know that computers show something, but you need to understand that humans are not computers. So he played rook c5, logical move, queen d6. For example, now it was a possibility of queen d7. That was also possible, but queen d6 is maybe a bit better. I think the rook c2 was here, right? Like this. Now knight f4 was also possible. But it's extremely complicated. Then rook d1, according to the computer, is a mistake. He should have played this rook c2. But it's so complicated that the humans are not able to calculate all the variations, especially in the time travel. So rook d1 is logical because he wants to take the bishop. And after bishop takes a3, that happened in the game, he took the pawn. And this is protected. This one is hanging. So I don't blame Carlsen for playing this. It looks very good for white now. But actually, after queen d7, white has problems with the rook. And if he goes like rook c5, for example, then e5, and Nepomniachtchi is playing for the win. He wants to go e4, he's very aggressive, and also this pawn is hanging. I mean, you can take on b4 because there is a pin on the knight. So it was very difficult for Carlsen to stay in the game. E5, rook c2. Now if e4, then he wants to go knight b2, and the knight is protected here. But instead he played queen d5 and rook dd2. And last few moves were not good for Magnus, but after queen b3 he was able to find rook a2, e4, knight c5, and queen takes b4. Now there was an interesting possibility of rook dc2, trying to trap the queen and the bishop. It was a possibility, but also what Carlsen did was okay. Knight takes e4, because if you take, that's something white wants. If these pieces are exchanged, then white can play rook da2, win the pawn on a4, and win the game. So, of course, black didn't go for that. He played queen b3 instead. You can see how active are these pieces, and queen on b3 is perfectly placed. I wasn't sure if white is playing for the win or black is playing for the win. It was really extremely complicated and quite interesting fight. After all, they got into this position with a strong pawn on a3, but slightly weakened pawn structure on the king side. This knight is good, and it seems like a draw here. After bishop b4, this pawn looks very strong, and rook d3, you would say that how is black going to do something, and how is white going to do something in this position, because this pawn is strong? How is he going to improve the position? Of course, there was a possibility of rook d5, but again, this rook is not protected, and black can go somewhere with the queen, attack the rook, for example, from c4 or from b3, and you don't have time to take here, because then I would go here, and suddenly black is winning because of this very strong pawn. I think maybe it's better. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's also possible to play with the queen here. So instead, Carlsen calmly played rook d3, trying to attack. For example, if you go here, then of course white can take here, and I mean now there is queen b2, but and this one is hanging. But just an idea, if white is able to sacrifice an exchange for these two pieces, then he can maybe push for the win somehow, but it's a draw. And I was expecting a draw here, because it's an equal position. Black has something, white has something. It should be a draw. And white was in a time trouble. He escaped somehow. I think black was pushing for most of the game, so I was expecting a draw. But now, I don't know what happened, but there was this immense will of Magnus Carlsen to win the game. And that is what decided the outcome of this game and whole match. That's what I wanted to show you, because that's the turning point. And it was no chess knowledge or something that Magnus is better from the chess point of view, but there was this immense will to win the game and win the match. And that's what surprised me, because Magnus is a world champion for 8 years. He won matches against Anand, Karyakin, Caruana, and one would maybe expect that there can be a lack of motivation that he is so good for such a long time? Maybe that's something you would expect, that he will not try that hard. Nepomniachtchi, of course, he was very well prepared and he was trying hard. He did his best. And he got into this position, which is quite equal. But to see what followed was amazing, because I didn't see such a huge will for victory in a very long time. What is rook d1? It's not something extraordinary, right? Ingenious idea or anything like that. Magnus is just trying to prolong the game. He is preparing for this sacrifice. He's trying to pin this queen down for the defense. And he is just trying to prolong the game and play as many moves as possible. And now he played king g1. Of course, black doesn't want to take here. That would be a big mistake, because now maybe I can even take here, but I would just take here. And then I will take on a3, then I will go with the rook here, and two rooks are stronger than the queen. So black, of course, he will not take here. He played queen b3, and really, I mean, commentators and experts, they were expecting a draw here. And now let's see what followed. Knight e2, queen b3, knight d4. So he's just rerouting the knight. I don't know, God knows where, maybe here, but it's not that easy, right? Because the knight is abandoning the king side, so it's dangerous. Nepomniachtchi played king h7, waiting move, king h2, waiting move, queen e4, and now he sacrificed. And honestly, black could have waited, He could have played something like that. But you need to be prepared for this. Honestly, it doesn't seem like a good move, right? White can be under pressure. No bishop e5 or queen f5 or anything. The knight is abandoning the king side, so that's something you don't want. And even if you take here, the knight is very far away. So I can, for example, play, I don't know, here, maybe, and you can't take there anyway, because I play bishop e5. The rook is hanging, and this one is hanging. So really, it's a draw. Maybe this queen e4 was a little bit, how to say, something you would like to take back, but it's not a big mistake, because after rook takes a3, that's, I told you, white wanted to go there. You can take here, and it seems like a dead draw, because you take this pawn, and then you are threatening to play here, and there are only 3 pawns. You still have this bishop, and it's a draw anyway, so why bother? But you will see why bother, because Magnus played rook a4, bishop e5. These moves are logical. Queen c2, black's queen is again very active. Queen b3, and now white was forced to play f3. The king is weak here on g2. No longer, he does no longer have this square on h2, a safe square he had for the last few moves, because always there are ideas connected with h4, not now because the rook is here, but connected with h4. I don't know, this f2 pawn is also hanging. So there is no safe square anymore. So instead he played this f3, f4, king f2, trying to hide the king here. The game continued for another 20 moves or something like that. Magnus was able to activate these rooks. But again, it seems like a draw. For example, you can't take here, of course, because this pawn is hanging. So what to do? He was trying to activate the rooks again. Queen h1, rook c1. Now if you play here, king f3, trapping the queen. So instead he went back, rook b1, rook e7, bishop c5, rook e5, queen d3 again. And you can ask what was the plan for white or for black. And honestly, I think there was no plan. It was just a pure fight. White was trying hopelessly to get somewhere to attack these pawns or something, but it's not possible because the position is a draw. It's not possible to win it. And black was holding by attacking the rook or the pawn, and it reminded me a box fight, a street fight, that there were punches everywhere, but no deep strategy at all. And it was really a wonderful experience to watch this game, because I think Czech grandmasters, if I would have this position, I think it would end in a draw very quickly, because it's equal. But Carlsen didn't want a draw. He was trying very hard. So we got into this position. They repeated moves, and this would have been a logical continuation and maybe a logical outcome for the game. Now we have move like, I don't know, 80, move 80 now, and no one would blame white or black to end the game here, because it's a logical continuation. It can be a draw. For example, in this position, instead of rook a5, if white takes on f5, there is a problem, because after queen d3, this pawn is hanging, and either if you defend it with this rook or with this rook, there is bishop takes e3. And if I take, then the queen takes b5, and it's a draw anyway. And again, it can be a draw like that. No one would blame Magnus for playing like that. But he didn't take the pawn. Instead, now he didn't play rook fe5. Instead, he took on f7. And he played rook b7. And he played like that. But again, this position, still a draw. It's a draw. But you know, we have to move 85 now. Try to imagine that you are holding this in-game against Magnus Carlsen for 85 moves. And you know that there is a 50 moves rule, that after 50 moves there will be a draw. But you know that it will be not draw earlier, because Magnus will try everything to squeeze a win from this position. Black can hold this position, but white is not risking anything. But okay, at first, black defended very well. He kept the king on the 7th rank. He was threatening to go something like this, so white needed to hold the 1st rank. And the first attempt for white was to play knight f3 and trying to check black's king either from e5 or g5. But the problem for white is that king on f2 is very weak. If you go forward with the knight, then the king will remain here alone, and that will lead to a perpetual check by black's queen. So again, Again, one would expect a draw here. And commentators were watching this game and they said like, okay, we will be here for a long time. But I don't think anyone could imagine that this game will last longer than 170 moves. I don't know what are your emotions about this, because it's not nice. It's not something you would call an art, a chess strategy, or the best game ever played, but it's a pure fight. And I consider chess as a sport. So from my point of view, it's a tense fight, and it's something from time to time you can enjoy. At first, black defended well. The king is weak, as I said, and white needed to coordinate his pieces and then try to join his forces and push everything forward connected. Oh, knight is back on f3 again. Now it's on e6, and now after such a nice circle, he's back on f3 again. So now I was expecting the draw, but Magnus said no, we are playing on. He played knight g1, silly looking move. Rook d1. I must say that I don't know if white is trying to push e4, but anyway, if he's able to push e4, then his king is weak again. So it really seems like a draw. We started this in-game with a rook on, I don't know, c6 and knight on e2, and we are back there. Queen b1, and now after 30 moves, Carlsen played e4. And that's something you can remember for your own games, that sometimes it's not necessary to win in the quickest way. It's necessary to play the most annoying moves for your opponent. And you know, dancing around for 30 moves, it's not aesthetic, but it's effective. And the problem for black is that he doesn't know when you are going to play e4. He needs to be prepared all the time. And you are dancing around, and then after 30 moves, you say, okay, it's the right time. And this is so hard. It's so hard to defend for black. So it was a hard time for Jan Nepomniachtchi, and he decided to play h4 after 113 moves. And I think that's a mistake. Why? Because now white got rid of his only weakness on g3, and the knight is free now. According to the computer, this position is still a draw. But I don't like black's decision, because this pawn is away and this knight is now free. The game continued like this. Queen b8, queen d8 was correct, and now I think it was necessary to play queen b6, check white's king, and stay in the game like that. Because in the game, black played queen a5, it's something I don't understand. And now white's king got to f2, rook e3 and knight g3, and the knight is perfectly placed there. There was a pawn a few moves ago, and you will see that the knight is perfectly placed there. Rook e2, and now king g2. And this is a construction that is very solid. Black doesn't have any more checks, and the game is changing in white's favor. Now he transferred the rook to e5, f5, and now he played e5. And the knight is protecting the king, and also he's protecting the rook. And finally, he got to h4, and all these joint forces led to a winning position for white. And imagine they are playing for 7.5 hours. 7.5 hours. Your rook is attacked, and I think everybody would move the rook away. For God's sake, we are very tired. We have like 130 moves, and I would play like this or this automatically. But Magnus, he played e6 like a machine. It's wonderful, because of course black can't take the rook because of knight g7. But after queen g6, it was even better, because he played rook f7. And now he can't take here, because he would go knight g7, take the queen, and play king g5. And imagine you are playing for 130 moves, a world championship match, the longest game in a chess history, and it ends like this, in a pawn-in game, a winning pawn-in game for white, because after king f7 there is king f5. And there is no defense for black anymore. There was this turning point with queen b6, and suddenly this piece coordination is suburb, and he had to go away with the king. Now after f5, it's winning, and there is one very nice final touch that Carlsen played knight g7, and after queen g3 and checks, the king is going to hide on g8, king g8. And now there is no defense against e7 and e8. And it was a turning point of the match. One can understand that, you know. I think Carlsen won not because of his chess skills, but because of his physical ability, of his endurance, and because of his immense will for victory. I know it sounds a little bit pathetic, like Lord of the Rings or something, but honestly, if you look at this game, it lasted for more than 130 moves, and they played such an in-game, you know. He was dancing around with the rook and with the knight, trying hopelessly to find a way into black's position. And he found a way. Of course, there were slight inaccuracies from Jan Nepomniachtchi's side, but who wouldn't make such inaccuracies when you are playing such a long game? Everybody would make mistakes, right? So it's logical. And I find this game fascinating, and it's more like a box fight than a chess game. So I was very curious how big will be the impact for Jan Nepomniachtchi's play. Everybody was asking this question. I mean, he lost his 6th game. It was a big blow, right? But he played the first half very well. So maybe he will be able to bounce back, you know, and because he had his chances. You've seen the 2nd game, and it was good for Jan Nepomniachtchi. And everybody was curious about that, but you probably know the answer, right? Because now we move. This was the 2nd game. Now we move to the 9th game of the match. So I will check if you have any questions. No? Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to ask. If you are interested about anything connected to the match, I don't know, personal questions about the players or something like that, seconds, teams, I can't promise I know everything, but Don't be afraid. I wanted to show you the 9th game. Actually, I was commentating this game live on a Czech chess channel, Šachy.cz, together with Stepan Jilka. It was fun, I must say. It was a nice experience. We were surprised by the opening because I think the opening went very well for Jan Nepomniachtchi. It was the 9th game, and I must say I would be happy as white in this position because white has a nice position, lead in the development. Again, he has this strong bishop. So for Jan Nepomniachtchi, it was good. The game continued normally. It was probably Carlsen's preparation after all, and they got into a normal position. Okay, there was a nice possibility of playing b4, but okay, he took. And they got into a normal position. White has center, more space. Black has this passive bishop, but on the other hand, he has no weaknesses, and the position is unclear. Rook e1, a normal move. There are ideas somewhere with d5 maybe. So Carlsen took with the queen to get rid of this e file. Queen e2, normal move, h6. You may have heard that in this moment Carlsen adjusted his knight on f6, and he touched the piece, and his opponent was walking somewhere, so he didn't see that, and Carlsen was probably, he didn't say Jadup, adjusting the piece. So there were comments like black should have moved the knight. Honestly, I must say it's nonsense, because earlier there were rules that you have to move the piece that you touched when there was an intention to play with the piece. For example, if you grab the piece and you want to go somewhere and then you realize it's a mistake and then you move the piece back, then you have to move with the piece. It's a rule, of course, but it's not applicable here, you know, because where can knight go, right? Carlsen just adjusted the piece and then he started thinking again. So it was a strange situation, but I wouldn't say it was something against the rules. Carlsen played h6 after some thinking, and the position is around equal. So it was not such a big deal for me when we were watching the game. The position is around equal, and it's playable position for white. And I must say I was very surprised by Jan's decision to play Queen e1 here. That's something we didn't expect with Stepan. He's going to exchange the best piece of black, and this pawn is hanging heavily. This bishop is strong, and white wants to pressure black on the queen side. So this position is actually good for white, and it was a chance for Jan Nepomniachtchi to stay in the match. But what Carlsen did was fascinating. He played h5, of course, because this was a threat, you know, the knight is trapped. So he played h5. And after bishop takes b7, he played rook a4. And honestly, we didn't realize what is the threat. What is the threat for white and for black? And that's the moment you have seen in the beginning of the lecture. It's exactly this moment. You can see Carlsen's face after the next move of white, because the position is around equal and white can play something, I don't know, f3 maybe. Black has definite compensation because his rook is very active, the pawn is still on a2. It would have been a different story if the pawn would be on a7, but it's not there. So f3 was a logical continuation, but Nepomniachtchi played c5, and honestly, I would consider this move to be normal. And actually, Magnus, after the game, he commented like, it's just such a strange situation. This position is lost for white by force. And again, there were comments that it's such a big blunder and Nepomniachtchi is not playing his best chess. That's true. That's true. But it's a hidden blunder, because you don't expect something like c6 happening, where the bishop is trapped. And there is no way how white can protect the bishop. That's very surprising, because you have this b file, but it doesn't help. For example, after rook b1, this is a possibility, because you want to move the knight. But instead, he played f3. It's also logical, and rook e4. The problem with this variation is that the rook is hanging here, and after rook a7, rook b4, rook b8, there's a pin on the rook, and he went a4. But I mean, this bishop is hanging, but he can take on c6, and rook takes b4, bishop takes e8. It looks good for white, but then you realize that he can take on b3 and the rook is hanging, so it's not good for white. So this is not working. It's strange that after c6 there is no way to defend the bishop, but there was a possibility of rook ab1. And now if I turn on the computer, it will show you the win immediately, that it's rook a7. But during the game, it's confusing, right? Because you think that there must be a way for white to cover the bishop. For example, I would think like knight c1 maybe. But there is rook b8 and there is the pin again. If knight a1 maybe, then rook b8, and no way to protect the bishop. There is an important factor of this rook a7, that this square is protected, this square is protected, and the bishop can't be defended by knight a5. So this c5 move was a big mistake, of course. But honestly, I find it a bit weird that there is no way to protect this bishop in an endgame, and it all hangs on this variation that happened in the game, that after bishop takes c6, there is this knight hanging on b3. It's just a bad luck, I would say. He tried to sacrifice the piece, and then he wanted to go with the pawn, but of course Carlsen was able to calculate all of that, and he played c5. He played this in-game very aggressively. One would, instead of knight takes g3, I mean, everybody would go knight d4. One would expect him to try to defend that pawn, but no, he was able to take on g3, and then he protects a8 square, and then bishop c6, and the position is completely winning. So Jan Nepomniachtchi resigned, but of course this was a blunder. It was a bad luck, but psychologically, I think Jan Nepomniachtchi was broken after the 6th game, because he knew he did everything correctly. He really pushed so hard and still it was not enough. It must have been so hard that in the second half of the match, it was not the same person. He didn't spend most of the game at the board. He was walking around in the back rooms, and he made blunders. This was one of them. He overlooked this c6. But I think it would not be fair to judge Jan Nepomniachtchi's play in the second half so harshly, because it was such a great fight in the first half of the match. And I would like to remember this World Championship. I would like to remember the first half and the sixth game. So if somebody asks you how was the World Championship match, I would like you to remember that Jan Nepomniachtchi was very well prepared. It was a great fight, but then Magnus won the sixth game and he broke the heart and the will of his opponent. And then Jan Nepomniachtchi started to play like me, for example. His level of play was very low. But for purely psychological reasons, he wasn't able to cope with the defeat. So even on such high level, you find these psychological nuances that decides the fate of the game. That's what I wanted to tell you today. And after all of this, I have the last game of the match, the 11th game, when Magnus became the world champion. Again, they played a very nice game. It was equal, and it was a quiet Italian defense. Jan Nepomniachtchi was white, and maybe he is a bit better, but Carlsen is such a big expert in these kind of positions. Knight e7 was a very good move. Now he's trying to push d5 in, and he did. And it's unbelievable, right? Nepomniachtchi played d4. It's interesting because there is the rook against the queen. Magnus took. He took. Rook e4, queen c2, rook f4. And now, of course, white can play rook takes d4. And it's around equal, right? It should be a draw. He can maybe even exchange here on d5, and it's an equal position. But instead, for some reason, Nepomniachtchi played g3, and he was, I don't know, he was thinking like, okay, I will win this pawn for free. The rook, if he goes, for example, here, I will go here and I will win the pawn for free. Oh, what he was expecting, like, I don't know, Carlsen overlooked this g3. I don't know what he was thinking, because of course Carlsen played d takes e3, and after g takes f4, queen takes g3, and it's clear that this king is so weak. This is not going to end well for white, and this is not an attempt for victory, to win the game, but it's an attempt to lose the game. So it was better to take rook takes d4. And this is actually a quite awkward moment. I think Jan Nepomniachtchi was already broken and he started to play badly. So now we can watch the final attack of Magnus Carlsen that brought him the world title again. Honestly, I'm quite curious about the next contenders for the world title. There will be a candidates tournament next year. Everybody thinks that Alireza Firouzja will win the tournament and then he will play with Magnus. Maybe he will win. but there are other players, of course. Now Carlsen chose the most professional way of this attack. For example, there was a possibility of d takes c7, and Carlsen waited for that because there is an open d file now, so I can give queen g1 and queen g2 mate. It's nice. So after knight f3, he went queen f2 and queen h3. There was a queen's exchange, and now this in-game, it was a piece of cake for Magnus because he has a free pawn, and it's a winning advantage. And he realized this advantage by a very nice calculation, pushing the pawn forward. And for Jan Nepomniachtchi, it was over because this pawn is too strong. So these moves like rook b3, these players, they can see that with closed eyes, right? It's a very standard procedure. And now he was able to promote the pawn, and the game is over. So Magnus won the match very convincingly. He won 4 games, and Jan Nepomniachtchi wasn't able to win any game. But I must say that, and I wanted to show you, that there was much more than the result of the match. There was the tension, the excellent first half, and I must say I feel sorry for the contender because he prepared really well. And I think Magnus Carlsen broke his will, not his chess ability. So I hope you enjoyed the lecture. Again, the last possibility to ask something. Do you want to know anything about the match? If you have problems with English, you can speak in Czech. But anyway, you can find so much information about the match anywhere on internet, so I think you can know almost everything about both players, about all the games, about options of world grandmasters, and I hope you enjoyed the match as much as me. I enjoyed the match greatly. It was a big chess experience, and I'm looking forward to the next match. So I wish you a nice evening. Thank you for joining me today. I can see that someone is typing, so I will wait for 1 more minute, and then I will say you goodbye.